Okay, so welcome to Module 3.1. This is going to be the physical context of the Americas. And remember, in this discussion, we're going to be looking at both North, South, and to some degree Central America as we put all the pieces together. Make sure that you have read through the chapters prior to watching these clips. Now, what we're going to be doing next is talking about kind of the main ideas here, and those will be the physiographic features, the climate and land cover of the Americas, and we're going to put this in the context geographically of how they influence the rest of the geographic characteristics of the region. So let's begin then with the idea of the physiographic features. And in the physiographic features, what we're going to notice here is that in the North American region, including Central America, the physiography is dominated first by three major orogenies or mountain belt systems. So here we have the Appalachian Highlands, then we have the major aspect of what's commonly called the North American Cordillera, or to us often the Rocky Mountains. You'll notice that in fact it stretches all the way from the Sierras in Mexico through the Rockies in terms of Colorado up into Canada and all the way to Alaska. And then lastly, we'll notice this complex of what is known as the coastal range or the coastal complex that runs through the western coast of North America. Now it's also important to note in the southern portion, Central America, the spines continue, but in fact they're fairly different. This entire area that I'm highlighting here is actually volcanic in origin, and many of the highest peaks within Central America, most notably in Costa Rica, Nicaragua, and Honduras, are in fact volcanic. And this extends into Mexico, with some of the most important peaks in Mexico being volcanic in origin. If we look towards kind of the origins or the sources of this, it is largely due to plate tectonics. And what we can see along the western margin of North America is a plate boundary, and I kind of am loose here, but in that area. And then you'll notice also right here, this island arc that forms the Caribbean is also another plate, and it's the boundary in terms of the Caribbean plate interior to this. Now these are the major upland or high altitude areas of North America. What we also have is this large area, I'm going to switch over to blue here, which is kind of appropriate, which is the Mississippi River drainage. That it starts here in, switch back to blue if I can get this to work. Yeah, here we go. This is the blue that I'm pointing out here is the Mississippi Delta region in Louisiana, and in fact all of the areas east of the Rockies and for the most part west of the Appalachians in fact drains interior and into the Gulf of Mexico here. So the interior of North America is a large drainage basin, accompanied with, of course, the large lakes that you can see here, the Great Lakes, Superior, Ontario, Huron, Erie, and Michigan. But in large part, it's really this major central drainage that governs the lowland areas. When we look at it then as a whole, we can kind of take the path of the Piedmonts and the coastal lowlands in the extreme east here, again up into our Appalachians, down into the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River drainage here, and then up into the Rockies, into the Basin and Range interior deserts here, and then lastly again the coastal ranges. So east to west, that's our process. Now South America to some degree is a little bit simpler, and we're only going to point out a few of the major points within South America. Topographically or physiographically, the main feature that you should be aware of is right here. And again, this is the Andes mountain complex. And again, what's happening here is a plate being subducted. So tectonically, this plate is going under the South American plate. And so we get this extremely high belt of mountains on the western portion of South America. And then interior to that, for the most part, we have a lowland area, and all of this area is, in a sense, drainage to the Amazon basin. Now, the exception to this is, of course, this area. You'll see this kind of high area, and this is the Guiana Highlands in the upper portion. There are many other minor features in terms of South America, but again, Main ones I really want you to know are the Andes in the extreme west. Interior is the Amazon Basin and the Amazon drainage, which is central to that. Up here you do have the Guiana Highlands, and the other point that you should note is that to the west of the Andes, because of the high mountains and the trade wind movement in terms of the basic circulation patterns, what we have to the west of the Andes is an extreme desert, and that is the Atacama Desert. So physiographically, that's kind of what we're looking at again in terms of an east to west transect. Again, like in North America, we would essentially be moving through the Amazon lowlands here, and ultimately simply to the Andes, and ultimately what you can also get are the Altiplano, but essentially what I'm interested in is the lowlands to the highlands. Now, if we look at it in terms of vegetation and, in fact, the biogeography of the region, this is a composite image from space of North America, and it's fairly easy to see one important characteristic. Vegetation-wise, what we see is moving again east to west, approximately at the latitude of Slippery Rock. We would be moving through eastern deciduous forests, and this is an area of surplus precipitation. And then by the time we've reached essentially Indiana, we're moving into tall grass prairies, mixed grass prairies, and then short grass prairies as we move up into the Rockies, and then down into interior deserts, back into an area of mixed forest. This is actually what's known as maquis or chaparral, and then into the Imperial Valley and to the west coast. So east to west, we essentially go from forest to grasslands to highlands. Now, north to south, the important distinction is that the North American grasslands essentially occupy this broad central area, and it continues to be very important agriculturally. North of this into Canada, what we see are the Boreal Forests, or what is sometimes known as taiga. Both those terms are appropriate, but again, large, broad expanses of coniferous forest. As we move south, what we have here is the Chihuahuan and Sonoran deserts, the interior deserts in Mexico and in the southwestern United States. But a little bit farther south, what we begin to see in the Yucatan, right here, and into the rest of Central America, are lowland equatorial or subtropical and tropical rainforests. And these rainforests and tropical dry forests are an important ecological resource for the world, and because they occupy some of the largest and most diverse ecosystems. That is, biodiversity within them is probably greater than it is anywhere else on the planet. So again, when we kind of look at this, what I want you to note in this slide is that vegetation and land cover changes east to west in a similar fashion to our topography. As you move westward, precipitation decreases, and therefore we move from forest to grasslands. So it's an east-west climate and land cover system. In South America, the system is somewhat different in that it trends primarily north to south. And in this slide, it's very easy to see the Amazon Basin, this large equatorial rainforest, the largest, in fact, in the world, and quite likely the most diverse terrestrial ecosystem in the world. As we move south from this, in this direction here, what we actually see is a drying of the climate, and by the time you've reached the Argentine plains, again, we largely in this area here have grasslands. Now, in the high altitude here, again, the Bolivian and the Peruvian Andes, this large swath through here, is an area of much, much less rainfall, and in fact, the biomes that are associated with this are associated with altitudinal zonation. And remember that from the textbook. Take a minute to read about altitudinal zonation. Remember, what that means is that we see climate changing and its associated vegetation, not with latitude, but with altitude. So again, when you think about this type of slide, what you're going to see is a relationship both latitudinally, that is north to south, we grade from equatorial to subtropical to temperate, but we can see the same thing in a relatively short distance, but over a large altitude in the Andes. All right. The next point I want to make is one about precipitation. And we kind of think about the Americas. One important idea is to look at precipitation patterns, because that really associates with everything that's being done agriculturally and in terms of the potential natural vegetation. And what I want you to note, apologies, my pen took off there. When we look at North America, by and large, the gradient in decreasing precipitation, again, is high precipitation in the east and low in the west until we get out to the Pacific coast here. So it's an east-west decrease in precipitation. In South America, what we see is the highest concentration of precipitation in the core here, and that in fact that precipitation largely drops off in this direction, kind of a north-south trend, although it's not quite that simple. So again, think about how precipitation relates to vegetation and in fact to land use when you look at these. In terms of land cover, again, the main ideas that I want you to get used to in North America is the Boreal Forest or taiga in the extreme north, the interior grasslands that are now primarily agricultural, and that occupies all of this area between these two lines here to here, and then lastly, where we are, or at least where I am, eastern deciduous forests here. Okay. So again, basic land cover. If we look at South America, what we see again is this extreme area of forest, and in fact this is equatorial rainforest in the central lowlands, the Amazon Basin. And as a result of this extensive area of equatorial rainforest, and the reality is that rainforests have rather poor soils, most of the agriculture, in fact the greatest extent of cropland in South America is in Argentina. You'll notice it down to the south in the Pampas region. So when we think about North America, major area of agriculture is centered on these relatively dry, or at least moderately dry, grasslands. The same is true in South America. Grasslands are really what most often is converted into agriculture. Now you'll notice in your book that there is considerable concern over agricultural conversion in the Amazon Basin. And that concern is largely because it's not terribly good land, and in fact it continues to be expanded and cleared because of the low quality. Large quantity, low quality. All right, lastly, again, your book talks a little bit about climate. I just want to make a couple of points about this. Please don't spend too much time on the Köppen classification system. That's what you see here. But we will use these letter designations throughout the rest of the semester. And if you can, just remember this major idea. A climates are tropical. And you'll notice here we have two types of tropical climates, AFs and AWs. AF primarily is something that is always wet. AW is a climate that is wet to dry, seasonal. And then you have the subtropical climates, dry and humid, but those are Cs. And then we have the Ds, which are the humid continentals. If you want to think about Pennsylvania into the Virginias, it's kind of the boundary between the Cs and the Ds. But so again, A's are wet climates, B's are deserts and semi-deserts, C's are subtropicals, D's are continental or humid continental, mid-latitude climates. And so again, A, B, C, D, if you want to kind of think about it, A, C, D is latitudinally getting proportionally cooler, and then B's are the deserts. Now if we look at the continents then, what we see is that in the United States and into Canada, and the eastern part of the continent, we grade climatically north to south. That is, we start with our warmest, our subtropical climates here, and then they get cooler, but remain relatively wet, moving in this direction. But as we move westward, what you'll notice is at about the 100th meridian, right about here, we move from a C climate, that is a moderate amount of precipitation, to a B climate, which is a semi-desert or steppe climate. And so temperature largely in this direction, again north or south to north, precipitation generally speaking west to east. So those are the main ideas there. Now in South America, what we see again is the idea of our A climates centered here. And then as we move poleward, what we're going to see again is the movement from A's to C's. And in South America, we don't actually get to a true D climate except way, way down here at the very edge in terms of Patagonia. But we do get B climates, and we can see our B climates here along the Atacama Desert, and then in the southern southern Argentine regions where the grasslands become fairly dry. All right, now that's it for lecture 3.1. Again, make sure you have gone over this as well as the textbook before taking the quiz. We'll see you in discussion 3.2.